She was the one who refilled the printer paper. She was the one who knew the Wi-Fi password when IT was out. She was the one who could tell you, without looking at a calendar, exactly when the quarterly board meeting was. Because she'd been setting up the chairs for it for 3 years. Nobody thought to ask her anything else. Simone Hartley had worked at Meridian Property Group's downtown Calgary office since she was 26 years old. She'd taken the job, receptionist and general office coordinator, the posting had called it, which was a generous way of saying she answered phones, sorted mail, booked the boardroom, and made sure the coffee machine didn't destroy itself, because her plan had been temporary. A year, maybe 2. Enough time to save while she figured out what came next. 3 years later, she was still there. This is not a story about a woman who was secretly a genius all along. Simone would be the first to tell you that. She didn't have an MBA tucked away in a drawer somewhere, no secret finance degree she'd earned by correspondence. What she had was something harder to put a name to. She paid attention. She had always paid attention, even when, especially when, no one was paying attention to her. The Meridian Property Group occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower on 5th Avenue SW. 43 employees, 2 senior partners, 1 managing director, and a revolving door of junior analysts who arrived with fresh laptops and left within 18 months, with the particular haunted look of people who had learned something important about corporate real estate and not enjoyed the lesson. Simone had watched them all come, and she knew that senior partner Douglas Parrish took his coffee black and his criticism personal. She knew that the other senior partner, Helena Voss, no relation to the Cecilia Voss in the files, they'd been asked that more than once, preferred green tea, and had a habit of leaving her reading glasses in the second-floor women's room. She knew that managing director Franklin Cade arrived exactly 11 minutes late every Monday morning and made up for it by sending emails at 10:45 on Sunday nights. She knew because she'd been watching. She also knew, and this was the piece that kept her awake some nights, that Meridian was in trouble. Not obvious trouble. Not the kind of trouble that makes the news. The kind that seeps in quietly, the way cold does through a window with bad ceiling. You don't notice it until you're already shivering. It had started with the Beaumont acquisition 18 months ago. Meridian had purchased a mid-size residential portfolio in southeast Calgary. 42 properties, mostly townhomes, at what everyone in the 14th floor boardroom had called a strategic opportunity. Simone had been in that meeting, not at the table but beside it, setting up the presentation clicker and making sure the HDMI cable cooperated. She'd heard the numbers, she'd heard the projections. She'd also heard, 6 weeks later, when the first property manager from the Beaumont portfolio called in a barely controlled panic about 3 units with foundation issues that hadn't shown up in the inspection report. She'd transferred that call to Franklin Cade's assistant. She'd heard, 2 months after that, when a second call came about zoning compliance problems in 4 of the townhomes, transferred again. Then the legal letters started arriving. She signed for them. She watched them go upstairs. She never saw anything come back down. Over the months that followed, Simone had done something she had never really set out to do. In the slow hours, and there were slow hours always, because executive assistants and office coordinators and whatever her title was, people always have the kind of slow hours that look like idleness but are actually something else. She'd started reading, not novels, not her phone. She'd started reading the documents that crossed her desk before she filed them, the reports that came through the printer before she sorted them, the minutes from meetings that she typed up from Franklin Cade's voice memos. She'd read the Beaumont acquisition file from beginning to end. Then the financial summaries from the past 2 years. Then the correspondence with the legal team, which told its own particular story if you read it chronologically and paid attention to the way the language changed. From confident to careful to cautious to something that tried very hard not to sound like fear. She'd built a picture she hadn't meant to. Assembled itself the way pictures do when you're looking at all the pieces and you can't help seeing what they form. Meridian was carrying the Beaumont liability at almost 3 times what they'd disclosed to the board. The legal exposure was real and growing. And the pitch they were preparing, the one for the Cascade Development Partners, the one Franklin Cade had been working on for 6 months, the one the whole office could feel the pressure of without knowing exactly what it was for, was built on numbers that did not reflect reality. Simone didn't know what to do with that. She was, after all, the person who refilled the printer paper. The Monday morning that changed everything began the way most Monday mornings did, with the elevator making its unsettling grinding noise on the way up. The coffee machine in its early-stage rebellion, and Douglas Parrish arriving in a mood that informed the entire floor within approximately 40 seconds. "Where is Franklin?" he said to Simone's desk, which was how he asked questions when the questions were not really questions. He called in. He said he'd be on video for the 9:30. Douglas Parrish made a sound that communicated everything he thought about people who appeared on video when they should appear in person, then went down the hall without another word. The 9:30 was the Cascade meeting. Simone knew this because she had booked the boardroom for it 3 weeks ago, confirmed the catering twice, printed the presentation copies, checked that the video link worked, and arranged the chairs so that the Cascade representatives, 4 of them, flying in from Vancouver, would sit facing the window, which gave them a view of the downtown skyline and put the Meridian team with the light behind them. She'd learned that from watching Helena Voss, who had once rearranged an entire meeting room, and then told the junior analyst responsible that the optics of a room were as important as the optics of a deal. At 9:15, Simone brought the printed materials into the boardroom and set them at each place. She straightened the water glasses. She tested the clicker. She was checking the HDMI connection for the 3rd time when Helena Voss walked in with 2 of the junior analysts, Kenji Mura and Abigail Ford, both of them looking the way people look when they've been briefed within an inch of their lives on something they're not quite sure they understand. "Franklin's joining by video at 9:30 sharp," Helena said. She wasn't talking to Simone. "We go directly into the overview, then Kenji takes the portfolio numbers, then I close with the growth projection." "Franklin handles questions. What about the compliance section?" Abigail asked. "Franklin handles it." Simone was still at the side table, realigning the presentation folders. She did not look up. The Cascade representatives arrived at 9:28. 4 people, 3 men and 1 woman, all in that particular category of business casual that communicates we know we have the money without needing to say so. They shook hands, took their seats. Exactly the seats Simone had arranged for them, and accepted coffee. Franklin Cade appeared on the screen at the head of the table at 9:31 in what was clearly his home office with a ring light that was doing significant work. "Good morning, everyone. Apologies for the remote family situation this week. Let's make this count." Simone moved to leave. She had her hand on the door when Franklin's face on the screen said, "Actually, Simone, could you stay? I may need someone to manage the slides if the clicker acts up." She turned back. "Of course." She took her usual position at the side of the room, the spot near the AV equipment where she was present without being part of anything the meeting began. Helena delivered the overview with the smooth confidence of someone who had been doing this for 20 years and didn't need to think about how she sounded doing it. Kenji presented the portfolio numbers with the brittle precision of someone who had memorized them very carefully, and was hoping no one asked anything that deviated from the script. The Cascade representatives listened. They asked questions. Good questions. The kind that went sideways to the presentation rather than straight through it. The woman from Cascade, who had introduced herself as Pauline Reese, and who had the quality of someone accustomed to being underestimated, asked about the Beaumont properties specifically. She'd done her homework. She said she'd seen mention of compliance issues in some publicly available filing and wondered if the team could speak to the current status. Franklin, on the screen, said, "The Beaumont portfolio has been fully stabilized. We resolved the outstanding items in Q3. Simone's hand tightened slightly around the clicker. She knew what the Q3 legal correspondence said. She had typed the minutes of the meeting where Franklin had told the internal team they were managing it. She knew what managing it meant because she'd read the letters that came after. Pauline Reese nodded slowly. "So the liability is resolved? We'd want that confirmed in writing before we proceed, obviously." "Absolutely," Franklin said. "We'll have that to you by end of week." There was a pause. One of the Cascade men was writing something down. Simone thought about her job. She thought about the coffee machine and the HDMI cable and the chairs she'd arranged so the light would fall a certain way. She thought about 3 years of watching and typing and transferring calls and reading documents that no one thought she was reading. She thought about the legal letters she'd signed for, the ones that were still sitting, as far as she knew, in a folder upstairs, not resolved, not stabilized, not anything that word meant. And then, she didn't plan it. She truly did not plan it. It came from somewhere that didn't consult the rest of her first. She said, "I'm sorry to interrupt." Everyone in the room turned. Franklin's face on the screen went very still. "The Beaumont compliance documentation," Simone said. "The most recent legal correspondence I'm aware of from November indicates 4 properties are still under active review. I wanted to make sure we were referencing the correct status before committing to something in writing." The silence in the room had a texture to it. Pauline Reese looked at Simone, then at Franklin on the screen, then back at Simone. "Who are you?" she asked. Not unkindly, Simone Hartley. "I'm the office coordinator." "Before we go further, take a moment and tell me in the comments. Have you ever known something important that nobody seemed to want you to know? Something you could see clearly, but saying it out loud felt like crossing a line you weren't sure you were allowed to cross? Because that's exactly where Simone was standing. The meeting ended 20 minutes early. The Cascade representative said they needed to confer internally and would be in touch. Pauline Reese paused at the door and looked at Simone again with an expression Simone couldn't quite read, and then she left. What followed was the kind of quiet that precedes weather. Helena Voss asked everyone to give her and Franklin, still on the screen, very still on the screen, a moment. Kenji and Abigail filed out with the gratitude of people who had been granted an unexpected reprieve. Simone began gathering the presentation folders because she needed something to do with her hands. "Simone," Helena said, "I'll finish up in here and get out of your way, Simone." Her voice was not unkind either, which was somehow worse. "Stay," Franklin said from the screen. "What exactly did you think you were doing?" Simone set the folders down. She had prepared for a lot of things in her life. She had not prepared for this, which was fair, because she hadn't known she was going to do it until she did. "I thought," she said carefully, "that I was making sure we didn't represent something in writing that wasn't accurate. You are the office coordinator, I know. You are not a member of this team. You are not in a position to make representations of any kind in front of clients. I didn't make a representation. I flagged a discrepancy from documents you had no reason to be reading. They came through the printer," Simone said. "I file everything that comes through the printer." Franklin opened his mouth and closed it. Helena, who had been watching this exchange with an expression that gave nothing away, said, "Franklin, I'll handle this." Franklin's face on the screen was not pleased about this, but he said, "Fine," and the call ended. Helena sat down. She gestured at the chair across from her. Simone sat. "Tell me," Helena said, "what you know. All of it." So Simone told her. It took 40 minutes. She had not realized until she started speaking how much she had accumulated, how much she'd been carrying, quietly, in the part of her that paid attention. She talked about the Beaumont calls, the legal letters, the Q3 correspondence that said something very different from what Franklin had said in that meeting. She talked about the liability numbers she'd seen in the financial summaries and what they suggested when you set them against the Cascade pitch materials she'd printed 2 weeks ago. She was careful to say, "I'm not certain," where she wasn't certain. She was careful to say, "This is what the document said, not this is what it means." Helena listened without interrupting. This was notable because Helena Voss interrupted people. It was one of her tools. When Simone finished, there was a long silence. "How long have you been piecing this together?" Helena asked. "About 8 months, maybe 9, and you said nothing. I didn't know to whom." Helena looked at her for a long time. "You could have come to me. You were managing the same pitch," Simone said. "I didn't know what you knew." Another silence. Helena stood up, went to the window, looked out at the Calgary skyline, the same view the Cascade representatives had just been sitting with. Then she said, without turning around, "What would you have done if you were in my position?" Simone thought about this seriously. "I would want to see all of it, not the summaries, the original correspondence, the legal opinions, the actual exposure number." She paused. "And I would want to talk to the legal team directly, not through Franklin." Helena turned around. "Can you put together a document?" she said. "Everything you just told me. Sourced. I need to know where every piece of information comes from. I can have it to you this afternoon." Helena nodded. Then she said quietly, "I owe you an apology, Simone." Simone blinked. "For what?" "For not noticing. For 3 years of not noticing." She shook her head slightly. "That's not acceptable." Simone didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She had the document ready by 2:30. 14 pages, organized chronologically, every piece of information sourced to the specific document it came from, with the date and the file reference. She had done it the way she did everything, thoroughly without fanfare, in a way that would be useful to whoever was reading it. Helena read it in her office with the door closed for the better part of an hour. Then she called someone. Simone could hear the tone of the conversation through the glass, not the words, but the register, which was serious and careful, and then she called someone else. Simone answered phones. She accepted a delivery. She fixed a paper jam. She did not allow herself to think too hard about what was happening upstairs. At 4:15, Helena came to Simone's desk. She sat in the chair beside it, not at the chair across from it, the one where visitors sat, but the one beside it, which was unusual. Douglas and I have spoken, she said, and we've spoken with legal. There are some significant internal conversations that need to happen. I can't tell you more than that right now, but I want you to know, the document you prepared is extremely helpful. It may have prevented something very serious. I'm glad, Simone said. Helena was quiet for a moment. Douglas wants to meet with you tomorrow morning. He'd like to understand how we missed this. What systems or lack of systems allowed this situation to develop without anyone at a senior level being aware. I can speak to that. I know you can. Helena paused. He's also going to ask you some other things, about your background, your experience. I won't tell you what to expect. I'd like you to just be yourself. She stood. And Simone? Go home at 5. Tonight, just go home. Douglas Parrish's office was on the corner. 2 windows. He was there when Simone arrived at 8:45, which meant he'd arrived even before her, which was unusual. He was not in a mood this morning, or rather, he was in a different kind of mood. He offered her coffee, which he had never done. Sit down, please. She sat. Douglas said, Helena has given me your document. I've read it. I've also had a conversation with legal that I should have had 6 months ago. He set his coffee down. I want to ask you something directly, and I want a direct answer. All right. How does a person accumulate that level of institutional knowledge without anyone realizing it? Simone considered the question. I think because people don't generally assume that the person managing the office is paying close attention to the substance of the business. Were you always paying attention? Yes. Why? She thought about this. Because it's more interesting than not paying attention. And because when you understand what's actually happening, you do a better job of the things you're supposed to be doing. She paused. If I know a meeting is particularly high stakes, I make sure the room is exactly right. If I know a document is legally sensitive, I make sure it's filed correctly and immediately. It's practical. Douglas was looking at her in a way she couldn't entirely read. What's your educational background? I have a bachelor's degree in communications from the University of Calgary. And I've done some continuing education, real estate fundamentals, business writing, an accounting basics course on your own time? Yes, why? To understand what I was looking at. He was quiet for a long moment. What do you think your role is here, Simone? The question could have been asked 2 ways. She chose to answer it as a genuine question rather than a veiled one. Right now, office coordination, managing the administrative infrastructure that allows everyone else to do their jobs. And what role would you like? She met his eyes. One where the things I notice have somewhere useful to go. Douglas picked up his coffee, set it down again. We are going through some significant internal restructuring, necessarily. I can't speak to the specifics yet. There are legal and HR processes to work through. But I want you to know that part of that restructuring is going to involve looking very carefully at how information flows in this organization. And I would like you to be part of that conversation. Simone said, I'd like that. I mean formally, with a title and compensation that reflects what you're actually doing. He looked at her steadily. That conversation will take a few weeks to work through properly. I don't want to offer you something without having the full picture, but I wanted you to know the direction. I understand. Is there anything you want to ask me? She thought for a moment. The Cascade deal, is it going to be all right? Douglas paused. Pauline Reese called Helena this morning, he said. She appreciated the candor. She said, and I'm quoting, that she'd rather deal with a company that catches its own mistakes than one that doesn't. He looked out the window. The deal may still happen, on different terms. We'll see. Simone nodded. One more thing, Douglas said. You were in that room for 3 years without anyone understanding what you were contributing. I want to be clear that I think that's a failure of leadership, not a reflection of anything about you. He said it simply, without ceremony, the way people say things they have arrived at and are sure of. That's all I wanted to say. 3 weeks later, Simone Hartley was formally appointed to the newly created position of Operations and Risk Intelligence Coordinator at Meridian Property Group. The title was Helena's idea. The scope was Douglas's. The job description, which Simone had been asked, quietly, to help draft, because who better, was 4 pages long and included, in the 3rd paragraph, a line about ensuring that organizational knowledge is captured, valued, and acted upon at every level of the company. She kept her old desk, at least for the first month, not because she had to. There was a small office available down the hall, with a window and a door and her name on a placard, but because she wanted to finish a few things properly, tie off the loose ends of 3 years the way they deserved to be tied. On her last day at the front desk, Kenji came by with a coffee, set it beside her keyboard without saying anything, then looked at the floor. For what it's worth, he said, I knew something was off with the Beaumont numbers. I just didn't. I didn't know what to do with it. I know, she said. He looked up. You knew I knew? I could tell. In the meeting. When Pauline Reese asked her question, she handed him back his coffee because she'd already made her own. Next time, come talk to me. He nodded. He looked slightly younger than he had 10 minutes ago, which Simone thought was probably a good sign. The elevator made its grinding noise at the end of the day, same as always. Simone pressed 14, then stopped, looked at the panel, and pressed 15 instead, where her new office was. The view was different from up there. Same city, same skyline, same light coming off the Bow River in the late afternoon, but different. She stood at the window for a moment before she turned on the lights. Outside, Calgary was doing what Calgary does in October, the sky going that particular shade of blue that only happens when the temperature drops and the air gets clear and you can see, if you look west, all the way to where the mountains begin. She had not arrived here by raising her hand in a room full of executives. She had arrived here by doing something quieter and, she thought, more difficult. By showing up every day for 3 years and paying attention when no one thought attention was required. By carrying what she knew carefully and for a long time until the moment when carrying it quietly was no longer the right thing to do. The position was not the point. It never had been. The point was that she had known. And now, finally, what she knew had somewhere to go.